All right, let's get started.
All right. Welcome everyone to our session hosted by ARO Educational Committee and Alternative Career Pathway for Young Scientists. Today, our focus is on clinical trial manager. We are absolutely thrilled to host Dr. Valeria Copello. She completed her bachelor's in biochemistry and physiology at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale. Later, she pursued her PhD in cancer biology at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. Dr. Copello is currently a clinical trial manager at MedPace, where she has led phase 1 to 3 oncology hematology clinical trials using gene, cells, and small molecule therapies. Today, she will present a brief summary of her position and give us some useful tips that would be helping us in breaking into industry in general. Thank you, Dr. Coppola, for coming here today. Floor is all yours.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sumna. So again, like Sumna said, I work at MedPace as a clinical trial manager. I have some slides ready for you, and I don't know, I think I'm still sharing. So just wanted to go over today's agenda. So I'll give my background as Sumna kind of provided some details, go over how drug development works in the industry, as well as give an overview of MedPace, as well as the overview of the associate clinical trial manager and clinical trial manager roles at MedPace. So as stated before, I did my undergrad at SIU Carbondale in biochemistry physiology. There I was doing some more research related to structural biochemistry, enzyme kinetics, and I used kind of those research skills to kind of break into grad school where I did my PhD in cancer biology. So for my graduate research, I did basic biology in preclinical animal models in castration-resistant prostate cancer, but I do want to emphasize here that as a CTM at MedPace, I'm not really working with prostate cancer anymore. I'm doing more oncology or complex oncology trials. And what you really get out of the graduate program is just kind of learning how to think, solve problems, and then apply those to other positions in the industry. So at MedPace, I kind of transitioned into an associate clinical trial manager role, which is essentially a fast track training program that is meant for advanced degrees to go from an ACTM or an early internal role up to a clinical trial manager where I can run my own studies. And then just to kind of give an overview of drug development, so there are mainly three types of clinical trials. There's the investigator initiated, which are very used by universities, academic institutions. So these are the more favorable trials because they're able to generate and disseminate knowledge. And it's largely driven by grants and internal funding and also government funding. So they're much more popular than doing sponsor initiated trials, which are kind of using the investments and assets from the industry or pharmaceutical companies to kind of drive commercialization of the drug and also finding new drugs that can be used in the market. And then there's also the jointly initiated trials, which are a little bit more rare. So usually we have multiple agencies involved, and we typically see this with those single patients, INDs, which are just using like a drug that's off-label and providing it to a patient under a very specific protocol, or public health emergencies, such as the COVID-19 clinical trials were heavily used with joint initiated with institutions as well as sponsors or clients. So just some fast facts about clinical drug development. So on average, it takes about 7 years to develop a drug from its inception, its discovery, all the way to getting it into the preclinical or clinical trial. So 1 out of 5,000 compounds will become a marketable drug, and the cost of development can range from 800 million to nearly 2 billion per drug. And then on average, the FDA only is approving about 25 drugs each year. So it's estimated that only 30% of those drugs will actually earn enough revenue during the patented product to actually cover all of the upfront cost during the early stage development and into the clinical trial. And this is just to emphasize that the whole point of a clinical research organization or an institution like MedPace is that we provide services that can help, mid-sized to small size pharmaceutical biotech companies outsource their clinical trial teams to us. That way we can help them without spending too much time, hiring all of these different functional areas, all of these different departments in order to drive that drug from that preclinical stage through the clinical trial stage, and then ultimately to FDA approval. So this is just going over a brief summary of how a clinical trial is kind of run at the clinical research organization. So it starts out with a bid defense, or just proposing that, a sponsor sends in a proposal saying, hey, this is my protocol, here's the drug that we're going to use. Can you give me like a schematic or an outline how you would execute this study trial, from everywhere with the budget to what is going to be scoped in for different functional areas, as well as how you're going to execute the whole study. So then once MedPace and the business operations team gets that reward, we then proceed to design the whole study. So essentially making sure that the investigational product or the study drug is manufactured appropriately, is ready to be shipped and disseminated to different sites, as well as designing the whole protocol. What is going to be tested? How are patients going to receive these treatments, et cetera? And then we kind of go into site recruitment. So now we want to kind of outreach to these hospitals around the world, depending if it's a global study, and figure out, okay, are you interested in the study? Do you have the patient population that the sponsor is looking for? And is there an unmet need in your patient population that can receive the study drug? And once sites are up and running, they get the approvals from their ethics committees and IRBs, we can then proceed into patient enrollment, where we start dosing patients. We kind of monitor to make sure there's no safety issues, adverse events, et cetera. And once that data starts flowing in, the sites will then enter that data into an electronic data capture system or a database, as well as submit samples, which are then going to be run by a central laboratory to output some data that could be correlative or provide safety biomarkers. Once all that data is in and we have samples analyzed, we do perform a data verification, cleaning, statistical analysis. So these are all driven by different functional areas, departments as well. And the whole point is to make sure that the data is robust. There is data integrity, and make sure that the data is logical and makes sense before providing that final statistical report. And then the last thing to do, once all patients are off study, all the data has been entered and cleaned, we then proceed with a clinical study report, which is then submitted to the FDA as a final. This is what we've done as a clinical trial. Here are all the data. Here's the description analysis. Here are the statistical tables, figures, listings, et cetera. And this will be sent to the FDA either for, FDA approval, or just to kind of say the drug didn't work, but this is all our data that we've, came up with afterwards. And on the side is kind of the different functional areas that are involved with these step-by-step processes. What's interesting is that I didn't list the clinical trial management role in here, because our role is to have oversight over all of these different functional areas and departments. So our role is to make sure everything runs smoothly, everything is kind of organized as an orchestra. We kind of, lead the team forward all the way to the end of the clinical study report, which is ultimately created for every clinical trial that's done in the US or in OUS. Any questions from there? I just wanted to give a brief overview. If not, I can go into details on MedPace. If not, all right, MedPace's mission. So we want to accelerate the global development of safe and effective medical therapeutics. And like I mentioned before, we like to focus on the mid to small size biotech companies, because we can provide a lot of good resources and services for these smaller companies, as well as we're driving their innovative products. I don't want to speak poorly about bigger biotech, but typically they always want to churn and come out with like the duplicate products, biosimilars, things that are, not as groundbreaking or risk high risk. So we do want to try to drive those new therapeutics that could have an impact on patients' lives. So just an overview of MedPace in general. Founded in 1992, we still have the same CEO since 92. We are a full service clinical research organization, meaning we can essentially do the entire clinical trial without any input ourselves. Our locations are Cincinnati, Dallas, and Denver. So the headquarters is in Cincinnati, and I'm in the Dallas office here. But we also have operations in 40 plus countries. There's different offices around the world. And in total, we are around 6,000 global employees. So we're considered a mid-sized CRO. And again, this is just showing the different offices around the world. So we have in-person offices as well as virtual offices where we still have presence in that country, but we do not have like a in-person office. And this is just showing off the Cincinnati campus where the global headquarters office is. So around 2,000 employees are based here, and the campus is slowly growing with additional buildings being created to kind of house in more employees. And there's like a lot of perks that a lot of, industry have, like parking, on-site gyms, an eatery campus, and they have partnerships with a bunch of the local teams. And again, as I mentioned before, MedPace is able to complete an entire clinical trial by itself without any input. And there's also some other perks and other functional areas that we have, like imaging, EKGs, central labs, medical device. So we're able to offer a lot of different services to biotech companies as needed. And again, as mentioned before, I do focus on oncology and using cell gene therapies mainly, but we do have different therapeutic areas. And essentially, when you do enroll or go into this industry or clinical trial management, you're typically asked, what is your therapeutic focus? What are your most common, or what are you most comfortable with in terms of looking at different protocols and such? Any questions on MedPace in general? If not, I can run into the CTM role real quick. So one thing that MedPace really likes to have and take advantage of is employees that have advanced degrees. It's very highly valued at MedPace because when you look at the PhD program or any graduate program, the focus is to make yourselves independent problem solvers, and just you're trying to advance the current knowledge in the field. And the reason why MedPace loves, advanced degrees is because now you've kind of built those soft skills during your PhD or during your MD or PsyD, et cetera. And now you can apply that to the role as a clinical trial manager. So we do have various careers that you can kind of scroll under. And if you have a life science degree, there are various roles like a CTM, CRA, project coordinator, a regulatory submissions coordinator, et cetera, that you can kind of glance through. But today I'm just going to focus on the clinical trial manager since that's the most easy for me to kind of give an overview of. And like I mentioned before, I kind of transitioned into an associate clinical trial manager position at MedPace. So this role is very specific for those who have a PhD or are currently in a postdoc position, because they know that you're able to kind of absorb a lot of information in a short time. It's a very truncated training program where you spend around 1 to 2 years not only doing trainings, but also kind of getting that exposure as a CTM. So you are doing some activities that a CTM would do. You would never sign off on anything, but essentially you're getting your feet wet, you're getting exposed to those materials. And MedPace knows that because you have this advanced degree, you should be able to kind of absorb all that information, apply it for other studies, apply it to your daily routine, et cetera. And then as this clinical trial manager, so the ACTM is more of an entry role. The CTM will be fully accountable for the studies. So like I mentioned, we have oversight on all the functional areas, all the departments to make sure everything runs smooth. we're the central point of contact for the sponsor or client, as well as for all of our team members to ensure that we execute the study appropriately. We also are the study level manager for our clinical research associates. So those are the ones that are going on site and checking on the data to make sure it matches what's in the database, checking for any safety data that might be missing or any samples that could be missing from the site level. And those are all the slides that I have. Does anyone have any questions? I feel like I went through that really fast. Questions, comments?
Thank you, Dr. Valero, for your excellent presentation and making us familiar with the whole CTM process. Does anyone in our participants have any question? If not, I can open the floor with some questions.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask, so I am relatively new in the field, and so as somebody who is, I guess, like wanting to be in a role like a clinical trial manager, what are things I can do now while I'm still like entering this field that can make my resume, I guess, like more,
To
what
stand
is it,
out.
competitive?
Yeah,
Yeah, in
competitive,
the
stand
field.
out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially since I don't like I only have a bachelor's right now, and I don't think it is financially smart to get an advanced degree anytime soon. So I was wondering like what like certifications or maybe like experiences I could um, gather right
Yeah.
now.
Okay. There's a lot of
Yeah.
questions in there that I can tease apart. So I guess the first thing is let's start. And this was going to be my open discussion topic. So I'm glad we can talk about, I just want to talk about the industry in general, because many of you may not want to become like a CTM or go into clinical research. So what I've noticed, and this is going to be based off my experience, is when you're applying for positions, no one really cares about your publications or where you get your degree or what your degree was in. What they care about is, okay, well, what is your experience? And I use experience in quotes. Um, and the experience, yeah, you can have all of these technical skills. Like I can do a Western blot, I can do a PCR, but what they want to know is what experiences can be translated or used as an advantage for the company. So one thing you could probably try doing is anything where you want to go to a very particular role in the industry. If you look at the job description, see what things on that list that they're looking for, any qualities, that then you can kind of work backwards and figure out, okay, I've kind of done this during my, research days. I did this doing, government duties or doing, committee duties. One thing that I added to my resume was more about, making presentations, communication. I did a lot of collaborations with different types of, investigators. Just being able to emphasize, I can give a quick 5-minute presentation to this MD that only has 15 minutes for my time, but I can still get my point across. And I think just being able to tweak your resume, remove out all of the things about those very technical skills that might be just related to your research and try to figure out more of those soft skills like communication, writing that can then be, highlighted on your resume. Um, I think another thing is, quantifying it, just being able to say, I've done this X amount of times and it resulted this, 15 times. So I've given, 20 plus different types of presentations and it resulted me in an award or this, or, or like being able to be on the committee for this amount of years type of thing. So quantification, also highlighting things that would not be would be more focused for that job description that you're looking at. And then another thing that you kind of mentioned was certificates, or I noticed that there's like a lot of those uh, companies that say, hey, we can get you a clinical research certificate, and you can put the little acronym right next to your name because you paid for it. And usually these are thousands of dollars. Um, I'm going to butcher this. I think I stole it from a podcast, but essentially, if there's a way to make money, someone's always going to try to make money. And these certificate programs, I don't find them beneficial. I think all my coworkers don't have them either. Um, Really, it's just trying to get as much experience outside of the wet lab, outside of the tech work is what's really important. So kind of expanding yourself, putting yourself in uncomfortable positions where you're like, I don't want to give this talk to thousands of people, or I don't want to present this poster. Uh, just being able to put yourself in that position can really help you kind of get competitive. And then the third thing that you mentioned was just having a bachelor's. And it's not necessarily a bad thing just to have just an undergraduate degree. The only kind of situation you'll run into is when you want to kind of grow into those senior positions. Typically, they favor those PhDs, MDs, because you've already had that terminal degree, you're considered finished, and then you're more likely to kind of get into those senior positions because you have so much experience. In your situation, what I've noticed with coworkers and other employees that just have a bachelor's, you just need to grow that experience in other positions. So, even though I have a PhD, my coworker who's in Europe had 10 years of being a clinical research coordinator. And that's very, impactful because she's worked with so many different protocols, so many different patients. She knows how to communicate things, and she knows what to look for when she's, finding issues in her clinical studies. I hope I answered all the questions there. I tried to tease it apart.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Anything else?
Um, I don't see anyone else ask questions right now, so I'll go ahead and it's all again coming back to having experience or enough experience to tweak our resumes and tailoring towards a specific job description. So recently it has come to my attention that in some situations, especially in industry, even if you have like 4 or 5 plus years of experience in postdoc, it is not actually considered as experience in industry. Could you please tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm not sure if the associate CTM job where it could be a starting position, would that require like 0 years of experience, or does that even require some years of experience, which is not necessarily your experience as a PhD and postdoc?
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess there's two questions there. One is, does a postdoc, if you've done, let's say you did 5 years PhD, 4 years postdoc, does that now mean you have 9 years of experience? And it depends, right? Maybe you're applying for an industry position where you did you're going to be like a flow cytometrist or a flow, some kind of expert in a very technical process. Um, in that case, you could say, well, during my PhD, I did these type of flow cytometry. During my postdoc, I ran the, flow cytometry lab or something like that. I was part of that. And in that case, it makes sense to say I have 9 years of experience. But in terms of, let's say, for clinical research, maybe you didn't do 9 years of clinical research, or you're doing all preclinical. What you can then kind of manage is, okay, you have 9 years of oncology research. So that is my background. I understand the ins and outs. But then you're going to also want to kind of highlight on your resume or speak to is, okay, what kind of experiences can be then applied to that position? So for the associate clinical trial manager, you do not need an actual clinical trial experience. what I've done during my PhD was I was involved with these clinical trials where the MDs would kind of take a piece of tumor, do some genetic testing, and then put them into trials that are related to mutational burden or specific mutations. In those kind of discussions, roundtable discussions, the PhDs were the ones presenting, okay, this is the targeted mutation. This is what we think would happen if we put this patient on this trial. And it kind of allows the MD to kind of consider maybe this would be a better option versus the other, mutation trial, depending on how many options that patient has. So in that case, I highlighted that on my resume, which shows that, okay, I'm familiar with a clinical trial. I understand how it operates. And I think that's really what's going to set you apart from other people. Yes, it could be considered experience, but it depends on the position, and then it also depends how are you going to communicate that to an interviewer, to an the company itself. That's the big key. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That came up like many times, and also again going back to that same thing. What are the major, you think, in your personal experience, the major transferable skill or soft skills you acquire during your training throughout like PhD and postdoctoral training that actually helped in your job in the CTM position?
Yeah, definitely. So the number one is communication. I think if you told me that I had to give a talk maybe 15 years ago when I was an undergrad, I didn't like talking. I hated it. I hated communicating. I hated doing presentations. I felt too nervous. During my PhD, I also still felt nervous. I still stuttered and jumbled my words a little bit. But I think that would be the number one, because if you're able to show confidence in an interview, you are more likely to get that job because you show, I know what this position is. I know how to talk to you. I'm not scared to talk to you. And I can show and convey my message very confidently. And I think that's going to be the number one thing that I think all graduate students, all academic students should really focus on is you're going to have to put yourself in a presentation. You're going to have to put yourself in front of people. I know another thing is like take advantage of your defense during your PhD or during qualification, because having those PIs kind of dig and your committee members dig and ask question after question, what that does is kind of prepare you for when the client starts asking you questions. Because at MedPace, now I'm the expert. I'm supposed to be telling you this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. But if the client starts questioning me or asking why are we do this, I should be ready to be able to defend my decisions and give that feedback to them in a very clear, concise manner. So communication is number one. And then I guess like another thing that I think really helps is so in my role, because I work with so many different team members, is okay, so how can you show that you work good in a team? How do you show your leadership skills? So are you able to convey a message or a topic to like a group of people in a room? I think being able to show that, hey, I did this X project with this many people, I led them, and this was the outcome of that project. I think that's another thing that you could highlight on your resume to show that you are a team player, you're able to kind of drive and lead a team to the end. So those are two things to kind of think.
Great. Thank you.
Valeria, I have a question, basically piggyback off what Shimana asked. So once somebody joined as assistant clinical trial manager, associate clinical trial manager, and he or she is working with the clinical trial manager actually, who is working on a clinical trial. So what are the skills that get acquired or that are needed before that person transition to taking responsibility of full clinical trial in the role of clinical trial manager?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess for MedPace, there's a lot of kind of factors that go into getting that promotion or that transition from the associate CTM to a full-on CTM. And one of those things is just kind of understanding how does your, your company structure work when you need to escalate or kind of drive a decision or provide a problem to your supervisor or we have kind of like a pyramid essentially, and we're in close discussion with our executive director team for any problems that could arise and impact MedPace or the clinical trial in general. So it's kind of understanding the structure of the organization, the structure of your team, being able to kind of pull together people and conduct that trial smoothly. And another thing is just so the associate CTM role, it's also considered a project coordinator role. So what you're going to be doing is kind of going through the simple trainings of how to take meeting minutes, how to document things, file things into our trial master file, which is essentially like a SharePoint or a OneDrive of where all of the documents are stored for that trial. And essentially also being able to kind of showcase yourself in the front of the sponsor is very important as well. One thing that I've noticed is that ACTMs get promoted faster once the sponsor gets buy-in saying, I like this person, I think they're set and they're ready to get promoted. So that's like another factor. A lot of it is just going through the trainings, getting used to the role of that CTM. Sometimes when I was an ACTM, I would get little roles that are meant for a CTM, but then I would have my CTM sign off on it for me because I don't have that ability. So just kind of exposing yourself to those day-to-day tasks, being able to do your project coordinator tasks to show that you understand the backbone of the whole system is, I think, what are the key qualities to get promoted. I hope that answers.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay. And I had another question regarding in case like someone doesn't have terminal degree like PhD or MD, but is having experience of clinical research, like working in a clinical research lab or clinical research department, and they got master's degree from there. Like, how is that helpful, or like, is that advantageous, or having other degree like basic science degree?
So I guess it's kind of like there's kind of two questions here. So I guess one of it is it advantageous to kind of work as a clinical research coordinator or in that role for 10 plus years at the site? And I would say yes, because you provide a different kind of perspective on things. But having that terminal degree allows, and I think I kind of mentioned this, allows you to get to higher positions faster because you don't need to kind of bulk up your PhD with another 15, 20 years of something at the site level. And one thing that I've noticed here for, the PhD CTMs versus the CTMs that came from the site level as like clinical research coordinators is that they have different priorities or different ways of managing, their team members. So I'm really detail oriented. I want to provide support. I read through the protocol and I figure out ways to, okay, this is the issue that we're having. Let me pull in these specific people to get their input and then communicate it to the sponsor in a quick way. Another thing with PhDs, it really is so advantageous that we're able to kind of take a report or like an Excel file and we can make a table out of it, make a graph out of it, and we can visualize that data because we've done it so much during publications, your thesis, putting together presentations for your committees. All of that takes a lot of time. And I think a lot of the people from the site level don't have that that opportunity because they don't have to put any graphs together. They mainly do more day-to-day tasks like communication with patients or managing, supplies and samples. And that's what I've noticed for the CTMs that came from the site level is that they're way better at finessing or communicating because, you're dealing with patients, you're dealing with investigators. They've dealt with sponsors already, so they have that communication built up. Meanwhile, the PhDs here, we've only kind of communicated or presented for our peers. So it's a lot harder to kind of get out of your comfort zone and communicate with a sponsor who can get really upset and start yelling at you for no reason. But it's kind of like you have to kind of build towards that. But at least we have the basic presentation skills. And I felt like I rambled there. I'm sorry. Any, I hope that answered your question.
Sure. So it looks like having a PhD is always better or
It's better.
advantageous
Exactly.
for
For
this
higher,
particular role.
exactly. For
Mm.
higher level positions, it's always better. It's not a bad thing just to have a bachelor's. It's just once you start looking at senior, executive positions or senior roles, you've noticed like there's not that many people up there with a bachelor's. So it can really impede your next promotion, I guess.
Hi, Dr. Copello.
Yep. Hello.
Hi. Yes. Well, thank you for the talk. I actually wanted to ask you 3 questions, if that's possible. They are
Yeah.
short. So the first one is, how much time did you spend working or getting the training as an associate CTM? The second one is, which is the natural progression for the CTM? Like, which are the next steps on the chain of command, let's say? And I'm also on the third question is, I'm kind of curious on how does the CTM actually relates, for example, to the medical science liaison, or if there's like a path that you can take sideways that can drive you towards there.
Okay. Let's start with the first one. What was the first one? I'm sorry. I was trying to remember.
Yeah, it's good. Me too. It's about how much time did you spend as an associate CTM?
Okay, so I think in my slide it had 12 to 24 months from being an ACTM to CTM. And again, those factors are dependent on sponsors or what study you're assigned on, what task have you done that are CTM level. For me, and we have like a training component. So we have like our own internal training system, which is filled with presentations and modules and tests and quizzes, and it's very academic focused. So that's a lot of things, that's one of the positives that a lot of people say about MedPace is that our internal training program really mimics academia. And so for me, it took 6 months to complete all my trainings, about 12 months to kind of transition into the full role as a CTM. But some people, maybe they don't get lucky. Maybe, for some reason, the study that they were assigned to, the sponsor didn't have money, so they had to pull out. So you can't really get promoted if you didn't really do anything on the trial. So it's a little bit of luck. It's a little bit of, self-motivation and I guess kind of driving yourself and putting yourself out there to just do things. Second question was,
yeah, the second one
sorry.
was the natural progression for the CTM.
Yes. So I guess kind of like the organization or the level. So imagine like a CTM would kind of be in the center. We have medical monitors or actual MDs that kind of provide safety guidance, or they can answer our safety questions or protocol questions that relate to the disease itself. So that's typically on the same level as me. We do have a very specific position called program director, or sometimes we have even executive director leadership. So it's kind of like another layer of oversight that shows that MedPace really cares about the client. We want to give someone that you can contact with who has 20, 30 years plus of experience. And a lot of those bigger CROs, because of how big their pyramids are, you kind of lose that executive director oversight. So for us, those 3 people would kind of be on our same level. And then all of the other functional areas, so biostatistics, data management, our clinical research associates, project coordinators. So they're all reporting to the CTM. And we are supposed to have oversight of all of those different functional areas. And the way like a lot of CTMs approach it is that I'm not telling you what to do. I want to provide support. Do you need anything from me? do you want me to escalate this to the sponsor because you're finding this as an issue? Because at the end of the day, we're all a team, and it can really, damage your trial and damage your entire system if you have one group of people that's just not like functioning. So at the end of the day, everyone here is super important for the trial. And I think that's what's nice about MedPace is that they really emphasize that it's not just one person. And the CTM cannot do everything.
Mhm.
And we try to tell like clients, you're looking at me and we're talking, but you don't see the 30, 40 people that are beneath me because there's layers and layers of teams that are associated with the study. So I think that answers your second question. And then your third one is, let me just get this convert. So you're asking if there's a way to transition from clinical trial management to medical science liaison. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, in part. It's also how do the two positions, the CTM and the MSL, actually relate? How do they work together? And as you were saying, is it possible to transition sideways, let's say?
Yeah. So the medical science liaison position, you would find that more at the sponsor or client level. So they are to me, what they do is they kind of, strike motivation in investigators. They try to make sure they build that rapport and also relationship with the MD. So that way, I like to use the MSLs from the client side when I need them to kind of answer an email, or I need them to help me with your issue with your patient, and they're not providing any responses. So the MSL is really good at kind of, gaining their attention. Like, oh, I can just text that guy. Like, yeah, we had lunch at, AACR. Of course, he'll be willing to answer, and we can get responses much faster. In terms of the comparison between the clinical trial manager and an MSL, I don't think they would be very similar because the MSL is always traveling. They always want to be communicating with different investigators. I know that MSLs love to brag about having hundreds of PIs in their phone as contacts, as on speed dial, right? So I think for MSL, the position you're probably wanting to look at more is a clinical research associate because CRAs are the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are going to the site. They are looking at the data. They are ensuring that the site is being compliant with, their ethics committee at the site, with the FDA regulatory requirements. They talk with the investigator and they build that rapport as well because, sometimes if the data needs to be entered, maybe the site is doing too many protocol deviations and we need to pull them back into compliance. Being able to have a CRA that has a good relationship with the PI, it will make everything run smoothly and all the documentation will be much better. So CRAs would probably be a better way to transition from that role to an MSL because you basically do the same. There's kind of mirrors images with one another. You're both traveling to different sites. You are both trying to kind of strike that rapport with PIs. You both are conveying, scientific information. One would be a protocol. Maybe the other one would be like a post-marketed or approved drug that you're just trying to get the insight with the investigator on. And overall, it's just more about, relationship building. Whereas for me, I'm not too worried about, the PI itself or like for the whole trial because I need to care about the bigger image where I need to see the clinical trial enrolled, completed, data entered, and we're done. We write the report. So I think CRAs would be a better option for that. I hope I answered that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Anything else? I think there's a lot of chat going on. Let's see. Did I miss anything? Oh, no, just Hillary saying excellent overview. Thank you. All right. Any other questions, comments?
In this whole process, who are the people responsible for evaluating risk regarding a specific clinical trial? Are those like the CTMs, or are there different people with their different expertise assessing or evaluating the risk of a given drug? or a
Yeah.
trial?
So are you talking about, so there's two types of risks I see, I think you're talking about. So there's one that's called the operational risks. And then the other one you're mentioning is more safety risks. So
Yeah, both.
both, yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
So operational risks. So the CTM will be responsible with the client, and there's a lot of intricacies that go on with clinical trial management. One of them is that you design and create study plans. So again, communication, written and oral, very important to have. That you put together these study plans that will say, this is how I'm going to run the trial. These are the parameters. And one of them includes a risk management plan. So you kind of outline, these are the risks that I could see with this trial. And one of them could be, we need to collect a biopsy at the end of cycle 4. There could be a possibility that the patient does not want to collect a biopsy. Maybe the site forgets or thinks that it's not clinically indicated. So this could affect the primary endpoint of the study. So it could affect the data analysis. So what you would say is, okay, that is a risk that, cycle 4 biopsy might be missed. Now you have to think, okay, so what am I going to do to mitigate that risk? And that's where the problem solving comes in from your PhD background or your academic background. Okay, so, well, we could communicate with the site in advance. We could start tracking cycle 4 and figuring out, okay, the patient's coming in around this time. Let's make sure we tell the site, hey, make sure to collect the biopsy, or make sure that, the patient is truly coming in to get this collected. And that's one way to mitigate risk. And you want to set thresholds, or you want to discuss with the sponsor if like this is in alignment with what they're thinking as well. And then the other side is also, safety risks. So that would be something to the tune of, well, maybe the drug that they're taking causes them to bleed, and it could be, a serious adverse event. So a serious adverse event, and if it's unexpected or potentially related to that study drug, now we're kind of expanding into safety. Like, so we have an entire team dedicated to safety management as well as reporting them to the FDA. So these are typically called SUSARs. In that case, what we do is, we kind of create a safety management plan, and we go over with the medical monitor as well as the sponsor if they have like a clinical team as well, and outlined, okay, what are the stopping rules for the study? Maybe if there's 2 deaths on the study, we have to kind of stop the protocol, stop the study, and then just kind of close out there. Just outline those in the protocol. So that would be like a sponsor kind of requirement. But then also there's the safety component, which MedPace would kind of fall under, would be more reporting or capturing or ensuring that sites are entering in that data or informing us of safety incidences. I hope that answers your
Yes.
question. Perfect.
That it, because there are different kind of risks associated. So I was wondering who is actually in charge of the whole thing. It could be the clinical risk, or it could be completely like business or management kind of risk. So it's everything CTM's responsibility, or are there different people behind them? Just like you mentioned, a team behind them to like overview the processes beforehand and then assess of some kind of risk management or how it can follow through during the trial.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, just to kind of expand on that one. So the CTM is ultimately responsible for the whole study from beginning to end, like I mentioned. And something interesting is, so once a drug is submitted for FDA approval, what happens is there's inspections. So an FDA inspection is essentially, you have different types. You can have for cause, which is where the FDA knows something and needs to investigate further. But then you can also have study-related inspections because they need to make sure that the data is robust, the data is clean, there's no unreported safety events that are associated with this drug because it will go to market eventually. So there's 2 kind of layers. First, the FDA inspector will go to the sites, typically the sites that are high enrollers, and then start to, look through the source, which is all the documentation for all the patients, make sure that patients were consented appropriately, make sure the investigator didn't make too many mistakes, and then they'll kind of create FDA observations after that. Then there's the CRO or sponsor inspection. So either the client sponsor will be inspected, MedPACE doesn't get questioned, but sometimes MedPACE can get inspected. And during those inspections, the FDA will only write down one name on all the documentation, and that's the CTM. So the CTM will be responsible for the entire inspection, even though behind the scenes, we'll have our quality assurance people. We have all of our different functional areas involved and our senior leadership as well. But at the end of the day, the name that goes down on the paperwork is the CTM. So it's a lot of responsibility, but I feel like at the end of the day, it's worth it, to be honest.
Yeah. It sounds like pretty similar to a PI in a grant.
Yes, exactly. Except we don't have to write anything. We don't have to argue, right? It's more, we have medical writers that can help write the protocol. We have medical writers that write this clinical study report. Our biostatistics group will program all the, the database so it kind of pops out very specific tables, listings, and figures. So really, it's more of an investigator who has people do everything for them. But at least the investigator knows people's names. I remember hearing horror stories where PIs go, "Oh, I was a postdoc in that that lab. PI didn't even know my name." So it's different in industry. We're way more collaborative.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Thank you, Dr. Copello. Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Copello?
Not. I guess we can end a little bit early, just a few minutes.
Yeah. I guess if no one else have any more questions, then we can call it a day. Thank you so much, Dr. Copello. It was absolutely a joy to hear all of your thank you so much for sharing your experience, and that overview was excellent. It was really helpful for all of us. Thank you once again for your time. It was a great pleasure.
Yeah, thank you all.
Everyone.
Let me know if you have
Thank
any
you.
questions, anything. Just
Sure.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.